Hi there, just a quick warning to let you know that this podcast does contain a couple of moments of fruity language, but generally, I think it's a corker and well worth the listen. Hope you enjoy. Hi and welcome to another edition of the Attention Seeking Podcast, where we shine a light on ADHD with different guests, infusing a cocktail of stories, insights, and usually a good measure of humour. I'm your host, Chris Healy, and today we're joined by a very special guest, someone who shares his unique brand of comedy, his laser-sharp wit, and his personal experience of ADHD. It's the incredibly talented Alistair Barrie. Alistair's a bona fide master of comedy, a regular performer at London's Comedy Store, and he's spread laughter in over 40 countries. From the stages of Australia, Cape Town and Mumbai to the iconic Comedy Cellar in New York, Alistair knows how to light up a room. His career is studded with highlights, performing at major UK music festivals like Glastonbury, Latitude and Bestival, taking several shows to the Edinburgh Festival, and receiving nominations for Best Show at the Fringe in 2013 and 15. With his 2015 show transferring to London's Soho Theatre. Alistair's show, The International, premiered at the 2018 Melbourne Festival, sold out to the 2019 New Zealand International Comedy Festival, and his follow-up, Alistaircratic and Woke in Progress, have continued to captivate audiences around the globe. Alistair has also entertained international troops in places like Afghanistan. We were introduced by a mutual friend when Alistair had recently realised he had ADHD and was seeking information on potential routes towards diagnostic assessment. Before we get started, I do have to ask that if you enjoy the podcast, then please hit the like and subscribe buttons, and do feel free to share it with others you think might enjoy it too. Mr. Alistair Barrie, welcome to the Attention Seeking Podcast. It's an absolute honour to have you on.
Thank you very much indeed. That's marvellous to be here.
I was thinking earlier, and we were just chatting before we started recording about how we first met. And I think it was we both know it was about ADHD. We had a mutual friend. But can I find out, when were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed, I think I may even know the exact date. It may be May the 4th, 2023. Although May the 4th is a bit too Star Wars, isn't it? It's probably May the 6th. But it was pretty sure it was it May, or it might have been March, actually. I can't remember. It was basically about... Suddenly,
confidently
know the date, and then I've gone, hang on, no, I'm completely wrong. It was March or May last year. Definitely began with MA.
Well, these are the paradoxes of ADHD. You've got meant to have quite poor memory, executive function, but then you're going, I know the exact date, or do I?
Yeah. And then
sure.
I don't, yes.
Yeah.
So, the actual diagnosis itself, well, it depends. The official diagnosis was then. The actual diagnosis was a friend of ours, mine, another comedian who was staying, who has been diagnosed with ADHD, showing my wife the symptoms of it as we were talking about our children. And my wife just looked at the symptoms, and instead of looking at our children, looked at me and went, "This is fucking you." And that was the first diagnosis from my wife. But the official diagnosis wasn't until a little bit later.
So, and just out of interest, when you looked at the list, did you think, this is fucking me?
A little bit, but I mean, I do find with some of these things, especially now that ADHD has become this sort of huge, I hesitate to say the word industry, but there is so much more sort of noise around it. And there are, as we've seen from things like that Panorama program, there's a fair amount of shysters around as well. So you do kind of get a lot of, like the general online questionnaires. And it's like, do you sometimes forget things? Do you find that you don't always get tasks completed? And you kind of go, well, fucking everyone does that, don't they? And then it goes, you need to pay us £600 for an assessment. I think, and funny enough, I was talking to a friend of mine, another comedian, and for me, one of the most fascinating things about all of this is the fact that I accidentally stumbled into an industry and a career where everyone has it. But I was talking to another comedian, because one of the big things I did when I did the diagnosis is I do have all my old school reports. And there was a lot more of didn't finish the task than I remembered. I know, but I said to my friend, I said, all these things saying could do better, because I was always academically very bright.
That's got to be the biggest one, is could do better.
As she said, and I think this is a very valid point, she said everyone's school reports say could do better. I mean, it's encouraging. Unless everyone's got a complete straight A stars, which we didn't even have in my day, everyone could do better, and it's a kind of classic teacher thing to say. But I was very much of the, I was academically, in the arts more than the sciences, but academically very, very bright. And I did pretty well because I could. But my application was never great. The list of, I've got it somewhere, the list of symptoms that my friend sort of gave. And they were, they fitted in, but it felt more like a kind of eureka moment for my wife than it did for me.
Was that disconcerting to you? That it was like, hang on, you're diagnosing me. Shouldn't it be me that's having this eureka moment, seeing it?
Well, not particularly. I think one of the fascinating things about it is one of the most important things for me, and talking to lots of other people who've been through diagnosis as well, is, I've talked about this on other podcasts. There's a great Rabbie Burns quote, I would somehow the gifty years to see ourselves as others see us. And that is, could you see yourself as other people see you? And almost everyone I know, if you've got, for the diagnosis, you've got your questionnaire, you've got your partner's questionnaire, and you've got like a parent's questionnaire or a teacher's questionnaire. Like the partner's questionnaire is usually, oh my God, he's a fucking nightmare. Your questionnaire is, I can be a bit of a nightmare. And the teacher stroke parent is, he's absolutely fine. So I think it's quite interesting how, like, your partner sees. For me, we've got two. The main reason we started looking into it more than anything else is because both our children were being, and still are being, enormously difficult. We've since had, my daughter's been diagnosed with ASD. My son is clearly on the same pathway. Much more of a struggle to get an ADHD diagnosis for my daughter, though. And that's why we started down this route. So I didn't realize, my wife and I were having, difficulties, not because we weren't having a good marriage, but because we were under a lot of stress and the kids were driving us insane. And so I went down that, do you know what? I've absolutely lost my throat because I'm thinking about 400 different things, which is the most ADHD thing I could possibly do.
I was personally, I was just wondering, you finished your but, you said but if you want to continue, but I was thinking there are a couple of things you said.
It was the things that I was annoying my wife with, which I didn't realise were things like, ironically, not finishing my sentences. Like all of us, I just go off on tangents, and then when what could clearly be said in like a sentence, I say in 15 sentences. Don't finish the washing up. Tasks that I think are perfectly, and I suddenly put something down, and then I remember that over there's that to do. And my wife comes back to these half-completed things all over the house, which to me has made complete sense, because obviously I had to put the screwdriver down there because I just remembered I hadn't Tipex that thing out of my diary. And obviously the Tipex is left there because when I finished it, and those, because my wife's, if we're getting into acronyms, my wife's got OCD. So, it's fucking disaster.
Whoa! That's a great match. That's really good. That's really good.
We found each other.
You could go in the kitchen and like be the tidiest you perceive yourself to be, I'm sure, and still have messed up the kitchen completely. Like you would have cleared 100%. Everything that you think up, and still, what have you done to my kitchen, as it were? Yeah, I feel that pain. Yeah. There are some people, because I looked it up, that there are some people that have OCD and ADHD at the same time, which must be.
Well, I think there's a very good chance my wife does. I think there's a very good chance my wife does. She was diagnosed with OCD as part of postnatal depression, which to anyone who listens to a podcast like this going, I don't believe in all these labels. We've just trotted out about 15 in one go. But no, that was what my wife got diagnosed with after the birth of our daughter. And it's not like, she's not like, I've got one friend who's OCD who is literally, it's kind of pals like that. Basically, on a very simple level, Emily's tidier than me. And the
Yeah,
way
okay.
I was around.
So is that your labelling of her as OCD then? That it's like,
Well, I've got
high
various
tidiness
labels.
is an actual mental issue that she has, therefore OCD. That's what I'll give her.
No, she was diagnosed with OCD, but at the same time,
so then,
I've seen someone with serious OCD where you kind of go for it. I think I've got, I don't know about you, I've got little OCD things like, which is a bit ADHD-ish because you want to go like hyper-focus and just pathetic little things like I like to have the volume on a stereo on an even number, not an uneven number, and just little weird things
that's
like that.
good.
And
that's good. Number things I've never got into, but yeah, that's quite interesting.
I've got a problem with odd numbers. They're the work of Satan.
Yeah.
But I think generally, Em is a tidier person than me, and I was driving her quietly insane. I think it was a big relief for her to realise that I wasn't doing it deliberately.
Yeah, no, I think that's the case. I remember I even feel quite sorry. Well, not that sorry, but quite sorry for my ex-wife in the, well, not with our divorce settlement, but quite sorry for her with the fact that I was diagnosed just as she'd kind of made the decision in herself and, you know, that she was leaving me, that was it. And I then found this out, and it must have seemed like such an excuse, and it really wasn't. It was more from my head. I was like, oh my God, there's a reason. I've been killing myself, really beating myself up, thinking I am useless as a human being. And I actually now understand what may have been causing these issues. That doesn't ever make it an excuse, I don't think.
I think that's being really harsh on yourself if you're saying it looked like an excuse. I mean, if that's her
I just mean for her perception. It was the last thing that she needed to hear once decided that's the end. Anyway, I'm not, you know.
But it's an interesting thing because it is that thing that you kind of go, like Emily, I mean, our marriage was not in trouble. It was under stress, like all marriages are, but it was not in trouble. You know, I also have an ex-wife and I would not... probably use the words I feel sorry for her either, but at the same time, I think that's quite an interesting thing.
But it was a strange expression to come out of my mouth there, but I'll go with it, you know.
I think we can all move forward and be positive together.
Yeah. I was going to say, though, you know, when you were saying about looking at the forms that you see online, I mean, I think most of those are that, I think it's officially called the World Health Organization diagnosis. It's in the DRM manual or whatever, the 16, I think it is, question. And you're right, they nearly all are. Well, everyone does that a bit, don't they? But I think with me, what really kind of makes it different is the one part of everyone does that. But for us, but not every day. That's one thing for a start, not the whole time. Like everyone forgets their keys or, you know, leaves their wallet at home but not on such a regular basis. Do you see what I mean? Like there are so many things that actually happen more frequently.
But also, I think it depends on, people are a fascinating cornucopia of things. And there's little things that I notice that I do that, so I don't forget my keys very often, but then I do have them attached by a chain to my trousers. Because
so excuse me.
Exactly. So you do things like that because exactly. There we go. You do things like that because you go, I can't fucking not go out without my keys again. I did it after about the third time I locked myself out of my house, and and then I've got some friend going, what are you, some sort of skater boy? And I'm kind of going, no.
I've had the same. I've had people going, do you think that's cool? Do you think that's, well, not really. I mean, obviously I do look very cool, but really that's not a fashion statement. It's the fact that
the kind of friend, this is quite a cool way of doing it. And then a friend went, what? You're a fool. You go, all right. But I think that the idea that you do, I had something, I've been having quite, obviously I've been talking about it a lot more since I got the diagnosis. Because the thing is, how old were you when you got diagnosed?
I think 40-ish, 41, 42 maybe, I think.
I was 51 when I got diagnosed, so another 10 years. But also 51 and relatively successful, family, house, mortgage, blah, blah, blah. So there's a bit of you that kind of goes, I'm doing all right. I don't, And I was talking to someone at a gig the other day because I did some stuff on stage about it. And it turned out that there was a psychiatrist in the audience who specialized in ADHD. So I ended up having quite a nice chat with him afterwards. Only 70% of people who get diagnosed later in life suffer depression after the diagnosis because there's a sort of what if thing comes into play.
That's an interesting thing I was going to ask you. That was going to be one of my next questions, which was, with it being almost a year ago, how do you perceive your ADHD right now? What do you think of it? Like, are you in a frustrated? What's the emotion that comes to mind?
The interesting sort of response to that again is that I said to this guy, really interesting because I didn't think like that because the way I feel, I don't really do regrets. I mean, if you don't have any regrets, you're an idiot because but there's no point with
ADHD. You're going to be regressing so much of your day. Yeah.
Well, I don't think there's any point for anyone. I think, I mean, we can all go, oh my God, at that party where I tried to get, oh my God, we've all got that. And you regret it. But at the same time, you can't do anything about it. So life moves on. However, so I said, I think, the way and he went, well, lucky you're one of the 30%. And I came home and told my wife and went, oh, it's interesting this time. And she went, oh no, afterwards you were a bit down. And I was like, oh. So again, how you perceive yourself and how other people perceive you. I don't genuinely think I was depressed afterwards, but my wife
I think in a really strange way, I don't have any knowledge on this. And that was a psychiatrist you're talking to, of which I have none of those qualifications. But having worked with quite a few people with ADHD, I think depression is a lot rarer, actually, with ADHD people. But because I think pop psychology in my own mind of why I think that is because, like you said, we have to learn to not spend our lives focusing on regret because it comes into our minds enough, the things we haven't done right and the things.
But interestingly, a lot of people, including myself, have been diagnosed with or prescribed antidepressants before.
Oh, absolutely! But I think misdiagnosed. That's what I think.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I was really struggling with. I mean, and also, I'm talking about this a lot at the moment. Lockdown, as a country, we're kind of going.
It seemed to really traumatize you. I mean, it must have traumatized everyone. Yeah,
well, it traumatized me because I was the father of I was the father of a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old who suddenly lost his entire career. And also, you had to be 24 hours a day with your children, didn't you? Yeah. Yeah, but as you said earlier, in terms of my comedy, if you've been watching my comedy, you'll have seen some stuff on there where obviously you sort of play up the trauma side of things slightly to increase the laughter side of things. But I was just getting so frustrated. And the thing is, as I said, my daughter's got ASD. My son is very similar. They have something called pathological demand avoidance. So like literally you ask them to do it and that will set in stone that they will not do it. My son has recently discovered a love of hiding keys, which can become very, very difficult when they're not changed to your waist.
Again, chain them to your waist. That's everyone. You need your whole household to be chained from now on.
That's the thing. I reconditioned all the keys up, all the locks upstairs in our house, and then my son started nicking them. They were late, and then about a week and a half later, she went, "I do know where it is. I put it in my locker at school." I'm like, "You little shit!"
What?
But, I know. I know the thing because he's definitely sort of. Much more classic autistic than his sister. He basically will hide. So he did it the other day with the key to the spare room, which is where I keep my suits, my voiceover stuff. So I was.
And you do have some nice suits in performances as well. I do like your suits. Yeah.
But they all live in a wardrobe in the spare room. My son,
which was locked,
reconditioned, took it, and we were like, and I was literally trying to get out of the house on Friday night, going, "Where's the key? Where's the?" And I was literally walking around in a shirt and my pants going, where's the key? And because he's autistic, he's not. First thing he does is he sees it, goes, oh, I like shiny. Second thing he does, he takes it, goes, I've got it. Then he puts it in a secret place. And then, because he's autistic, he forgets where he's put it so that it stays secret. So what are you going to do? You're going to clip him around the ear? You're going to, no, you're not. Of course you're not. So that sort of thing would drive me fucking insane. And if you take that back to like lockdown, I think it's fascinating how we are all writing off lockdown as just as an inconvenience. Whereas I think it had a massive effect on our mental health. And it had a massive, and I was basically getting so angry. My wife said, and I'd never even considered antidepressants. And then I went to the GP and they went, all right. And they put me on some sertraline.
Of course they did. Here you go. Have a load of sertraline.
But I talk about this on stage. If I talked about this on stage 5 years ago, people would be like, oh, goodness me, antidepressants, well, that's through it. Now you just get a kind of a murmur of acknowledgement because literally, that many people in the audience are on sertraline as well because anyone's having a bit of a tough time. They just dole out antidepressants. Well, I think mine did help with my propensity to get angry. And I think, and which is also an ADHD thing as well. So I don't know, because I'm on L-Vance for ADHD.
Same here.
Basically, my wife said to me, when I was on 50 milligrams of sertraline, as its other side effect, which they don't tell you about, is an inability to ejaculate, which is tremendous fun. And so I was
that
like,
what caused it? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. And I basically, well, as I say on stage, it's even more depressing when you realise that the reason you're on them in the first place is because of your children. You think, well, for fuck's sake, if you'd given them to me 6 years ago, none of this shit would have happened.
Yeah.
But I went down to 25 milligrams, which I'm still on actually, because my wife said, like, I can tell when you're not on them, and it just, I don't know if it just takes the edge off. I'd like to not be on them, and I will be soon. But it's almost become now just a kind of, I don't even think about it. It's 25 milligrams is so little.
That's so small. I don't think I was ever on 25 milligrams.
No, it's almost.
I was going to ask though, because I do want to talk about comedy quite specifically, but I was going to ask you, because you were just saying, I was trying to find out where you were at with kind of how you perceive the ADHD, because I, in my own layman's terms, I kind of put a small section when in that book I published. I had about 7 stages, which went from kind of like realization and shock to then when you're getting diagnosed, there's a kind of like slight doubt of it once you are diagnosed, because you have to either pay a lot of money or wait a long time to get the diagnosis. And then when you get it, you find out that it's mainly, I mean, there is your one that probably features school reports, but some of them are just like basically the questionnaire. A questionnaire gives you a score. That's the result. And when you think that it's that you've wasted years for or spent thousands of pounds on, that can only add to your slight doubt, because friends you would have talked to have said, really? Do you think you have? I'm not so sure. This sort of idea, and it's like a social gaslighting. I think that's what my girlfriend called it. It was like a social gaslighting of it being just a label. It's not really anything. So you don't have that doubt.
That's the problem with the idea of labels and the fact, and again, the fact that the human brain is infinite. It's there's so many. I mean, my parents, for instance, are when I mentioned the different questionnaires, like it was very funny because it was things like, does he do this? And Emily's, my wife, was always like, all the time. Mine was like sometimes, and my mum and dad's was like, never. And my mum and dad.
He's an upright gentleman, went to the top schools of this country, and really.
Well,
he could have been a doctor, He could have been a doctor, but he decided to do comedy.
My dad is a doctor, or was a doctor. My mother was a nurse, and they're like, and they've always had a massive distrust of the psychiatric professions, partly because there is a reason to distrust because if the human brain was small enough to know how it worked, then we wouldn't be able to work out how it works because our brains would be so small. And what was really funny on the Emily wrote her questionnaire, I wrote mine, my mum wrote hers, and then at the very bottom, it's kind of etched in my brain, she wrote, we think, obviously she couldn't possibly put it in her own terms, it had to be her father, my father and her, we think it's absolutely ridiculous to be asking these questions 40 years after the fact. He was a very normal boy. He was a perfectly normal boy who's grown up into a very positive adult. And it was like, oh my God, it's a multiple choice. You don't need to write something at the bottom.
No, and it's not a judgment. It's not an examination to judge you as parents either.
Well, again, I think this is something my wife says, I think that they really worry about the fact that their parent, that they missed it as parents as being judged. I genuinely don't think. I love my parents. I don't think they missed anything at all. I don't think they actually give a shit, and I don't mean they don't give a shit about them. They don't give a shit about their son. But my dad is like, well, it's just another label, isn't it? I mean, then the people are people. That's what some people are like this, some people are like that. And I think it's interesting when you look at like this, like Lee Anderson, this Tory prick, who actually said a little while ago, oh, all this ADHD, it's just bad parenting. And I'm like, fuck off. Do you have any idea what it's like parenting an ADHD child, especially when you've got ADHD yourself? And actually, it's not, the thing is, it is a label. But what we're trying to do is bring up our children. If you can help a child with ADHD
yes,
have a better childhood, then people go, well, back in my day, they just used to be called irritating little shits. They are still irritating little shits.
Yeah.
But I'm not thumping them because I don't want them to grow up to be irritating big shits, or for that matter, Conservative MPs.
Or traumatized by the fact that they now believe themselves to be complete failures. When I once had, I suffered from that RSD. I remember talking to you about it, the emotional dysregulation quite a bit. And someone sent me a video this morning, actually, of some American psychiatrist saying the DSM detached emotional, like since the 1790s, when symptoms of ADHD were being noticed, emotional regulation, dysregulation was part of it. And that seems to have been detached somehow for some reason. And I remember one of the times I was working with a coach and I'd finished my teaching career, didn't know what I was going to do. And I had a major episode of RSD to do with my relationship. And then I had to go online to the coach. And I said, look, I want to cancel it on text. Want to cancel it. And he very responsibly said, actually, can I have a chat with you? He didn't know about my ADHD. And I was just mortified by how embarrassed I was. I was in floods of tears. I was angry. I was like spluttering almost. And out of desperation, I think he used a typical coaching thing of going, I think really desperate to kind of calm me down, was like, if this was a student in one of your classes when you were a teacher, what would you say to them? And it was really quite profound what my response immediately was, which was, you're not alone. And it's really that, actually, I'm feeling a little bit like, that is quite profound. And I think that's
also a very lovely way of dealing with it.
No, but that is part of the point. I think when you start out and someone says, do you think you might have it? Or you read some of those symptoms and you start going, didn't realize it affects adults. Didn't realize these things. I'm ticking most of those. Yeah, maybe other people do as well. But when you start doing that, I think the idea of this label, everyone wants a label kind of thing. It's not a great label to have, ADHD. It's not a great blessing to have in your life. I mean, there are lots of things that hopefully we'll talk about in a minute. But the fact is, if it makes you feel less alone and helps you begin to accept yourself as who you are, that can't be something to resent. And that's, you mentioned the Panorama program earlier, and I found that was trailed really, maybe it's like algorithms trailing me because they know I'm into ADHD, but it was really trailed more than any other Panorama I've come across.
It's also the most, I think I'm right in saying,
complained about.
One of the most complained about programs in BBC history. The point about that program, which I haven't watched, is that what it did was identify a problem and then sensationalize the response, which was basically, these clinics are giving out free drugs and
misdiagnosing.
Actually, what it was there is a massive backlog of people who need treatment, and these shysters are filling a vacuum because the entire fabric of our country is broken down.
It was really interesting. The guy that was the NHS doctor they filmed, and remember, they told him they were filming it, so therefore he did do a very thorough diagnosis. They didn't tell the other people they were filming it, so slightly different experimentation scenarios. But he wrote the very next day in The Guardian explaining that this is not the issue, because that was how they were trailing it.
No,
this is the problem with ADHD.
I read his article.
And it was really good. Yeah. Really good.
I read his article and I felt he was a bit like, it was like, mate, to be honest, if you're going to get onto a TV program, possibly because of the business I work in, like you've got no control. So you need to work out how because he was set up and then had to write, I think, The Guardian going, this is bollocks. But a lot more people have seen Panorama than read The Guardian.
Yes. I think he was actually quite set up. I don't think he was that frequently.
I think he was utterly
I don't think he'd done that many assessments before doing that. But anyway,
I mean, you must have had this. You must have had this, that people sort of say, oh, really? As though what you do is you basically fill in an online questionnaire, you phone up a doctor for half an hour, and then you get a diagnosis. My diagnosis was the final one was a 3-hour one-on-one, assessment. But again, when I got diagnosed, and I actually said to a mate of mine, I'm out with some old friends from school, and it was quite funny because I kind of went, I don't quite understand his response. He's a very, very old, very, very dear friend. But his first response when I said, I've been diagnosed with ADHD, and he went, "Oh God, I'm sorry." And I was like, "Mate, it's not cancer. I've had it all my life, and since you've known me, we've known each other since we were 10, so it's no big deal." And then a bit later, he went, "Well, and he basically said, well, it's all bollocks, isn't it?" And I'm like, "Well, one or the other, mate. I don't, you act like it's cancer, and then you go." But he's kind of a little bit of a, bless his heart, sort of a bit like my parents, who was an old Tory, for want of a better phrase, that kind of, this sort of stuff. And my mum is, same thing. My mum is very funny on. The AD, because she was dismissing our worries about our children completely, which was, my wife basically had a massive go at her because she's got, we decided there's not a problem. It's like, you've seen them for 22 hours. And their idea is more discipline. And I watched my mother be incredibly rude to my children. And my wife looked at me and went, what is she doing? And she went, "Oh my God, is this discipline?" I was like, "Yeah, this is discipline." And I said to my mum a bit later, I said, "If you're not going to be on board, fine, but I don't want to talk about it with you because I don't see the point." I said, the reason the children were better behaved around you for that 20-hour period, they were a nightmare afterwards because they've been masking, but because they're scared of you. And this blew my mind. I went, "Because they're scared of you." And my mum went, "Well, that's no bad thing." And you go, "Oh my fucking God, your idea of being a grandparent is that your grandchildren should be scared of you." And that is not how I look at things. But she will go.
It's interesting because I was going to make a judgment there to say, to suggest maybe it's because maybe that's a very odd response for a grandparent, because often they're more relaxed with grandparents than they were with their own children. But actually, I'm also, knowing you and knowing the slight politics involved in this, like you said, it's just bad parenting. That's why they're like this. She's probably overcompensating on top of that with trying to demonstrate how...
There's definitely a case of that. But then there's also, with autism, because again, she's going... One of my mum's things is, I think people should just talk less about mental health and just get on with it. And it's like, well, if you just don't talk about it, then you're going to end up with more problems. And
that's a very British stiff upper lip thing, isn't it?
Massively. But the autism thing was because she was like, well, it's my friend who's got, she was telling about her autistic grandchild, and it's just perfectly normal. It's just a label. And I'm like, I haven't told my mum that our daughter has got an official ASD diagnosis, because frankly, I don't see the point.
Wow.
But my mum thinks she's an expert because she was a children's nurse at Great Ormond Street. And she's like, and I have to do this quite regularly because this is mostly what I'm writing about at the moment. I've been saying this on stage recently because she goes, well, I do know because I used to look after autistic children in the 60s in Great Ormond Street. And I'm like, yes, Mum, but you also called them spastics. So let's, crack on, because that's a bit of a different sort of thing, isn't it? And you look at the people my mum was looking after in those that you've got pictures, and they are severely mentally and physically handicapped children. My daughter's fine, but she has got ASD.
But some of in mainstream schools, sort of further up the spectrum, further along the spectrum, ASD students I've worked with, the kids nowadays, they don't say spastic and stuff in school. They're still homophobic slurs continually, and some racism. But there isn't disableist stuff.
My mother would use the word spastic about kids.
No. But my point being that the kids, it's quite amazing how kids can be so much more tolerant than we expect. But my point being, actually, my point was more that when I was at various boarding schools, so I moved around quite a bit. That might have been the ASD as well. But yeah, when I was at various schools, the kids that were eccentric and bullied, now obviously they were kids with ASD. That's what their eccentricity was, And I just, that's the old school that your mum's probably trying to return to. There's nothing wrong with them. They're just a bit eccentric.
Well,
you know,
but
that's
then
kind of idea.
There's also that idea, I think, and this goes for the same for ADHD as ASD, is that what they think people who are diagnosing these conditions are doing is going, well, we're just trying to make everyone the same and some sort of homogenized, that's the way it should be. And I'm absolutely not. The variety is what makes life. Yeah. But what you want to do, especially as a parent, for instance, is what you want to do is provide, and I would argue, as a sort of functioning member of society for everyone, as a progressive.
As a human being, maybe.
You want to give everyone the best possible ability to reach their potential. And so, for instance, my wife is dyslexic. We're pretty sure that my daughter reads brilliantly, my son less so. We're pretty sure he's dyslexic. And so you kind of go, well, you know, my wife just got in when they started diagnosing dyslexia, so she got extra help. But if she'd been 5 years older, she wouldn't have got any of that help. Similarly, like my best friend was dyslexic, and he struggled terribly at school, despite being one of the brightest people I've ever known. And that sort of the refusal to accept that you could actually help people who are different, rather than the idea that you're just trying to make everyone under the same umbrella. No, you're just trying to help people achieve their potential.
Someone asked me once what the most important thing in teaching was. I can't remember now the sort of profound, but it came straight out, was I think the most important thing, the most valuable thing teachers give to students, or that students can get from education, genuinely, far more than exam results and academic knowledge, which is a great thing to have, but is to actually education to foster that individuality, to actually really help that blossom. Yeah. Because I think it's when you homogenize children that it all goes wrong. I wanted to ask you, because we've been chatting loads, and I just want to really talk a little bit about actually the connection that seems to be there, just numbers-wise, between comedians and ADHD. Because, you know, just off the top of my head, I know there's been Simon Brodkin, Johnny Vegas, Rod Gilbert, Josie Long, loads of Ed Byrne as well, right? Alistair Barrie, all of these
Ed Byrne's got a wonderful line about it, which is when he got diagnosed, he said, I was diagnosed with ADHD, which for a comedian is like discovering you have skin, because, you know, and literally, I talked about it in the last show, that like a few years ago, there are a few people who got diagnosed. Good friends of mine, Shappy called Sandy, or Shaparak as she now is known. Angela Barnes. Angela was another example of someone who was given a lot of antidepressants before the ADHD diagnosis. But there was quite a lot of kinds of people doing basically shows that were essentially my ADHD, how I've discovered this and changed. And actually now, so many comedians, literally, it's much rarer to find a comedian who hasn't got it, and then you start to look, and it comes back to your original question about the symptoms. The symptoms of ADHD are very similar to the skill set of a comedian. Lateral thought, going off in tangent, not terribly well organised, thoughts not terribly well organised, so you see things other people don't.
Quick thinking.
Don't like to be told what to do, like being your own boss, quick thinking, creative. I'm very interesting one. I have a friend who is on LVANs, and she works with the Comedy Store Players, the improv group, and she has to not take her meds when she's doing improv, because basically the meds kind of bridge that bit in her synapses that the ADHD use. So she would make much more interesting connections when she wasn't on something that bridged it. So I have not found a problem. I don't think I have found a problem with creativity with the drugs.
No, I think creativity is quite it's a really strong thing with people with ADHD. I have a feeling that, you know, we were talking to start with about the list of criteria or symptoms. One of the things, I think I may have even given you this, it's from ADHD 2.0 by Halliwell and Rates, but the paradoxical traits, I think that's what actually gives you a real insight that you have it or not, these opposites. Because if you think with comedy, yes, creativity, but at the same time, there's a real element of often people with ADHD having very low self-worth. So to put yourself in an arena that's so potentially harsh and relies so much on other people's opinions of you, like for your own validation, is like, it's a really sadomasochistic thing to do for people. But yes, it is really prevalent.
It's the central paradox of not just comedians, but sort of performers generally, but especially with comedians, is basically that thing of kind of going, here's my opinion, and my opinion's what counts, because that's the kind of persona you have to project on stage.
You have to
and
have,
it's the paradox of it, basically enormous confidence, but actually what you're essentially doing at the same time is putting yourself out in public and pleading with people to like you.
Please like me.
Exactly. So it's that is in essence the paradox of comedy. You know, it's like, I'm terribly deep and important and authoritative. Please like me, and I think that's comedy in a nutshell. And actually, literally, almost every comic now, I mean, I think it's something like 95%. I don't think anyone's actually done the figures, but 95%.
Is that your estimate? Genuinely, do you reckon your estimate is? Because apart from anything, have you started diagnosing, like, not everyone you meet, but I did go through a phase where practically everyone, but then I think we do kind of gravitate towards each other with
I think there is a definite finding your tribe. I think there's a definite finding your tribe thing that goes on. And it's not, it doesn't really, I was talking to a friend the other day, another comedian who's very definitely ADHD, with me, him, and another comic who is less so, obviously, but I would say probably still. We were talking about our kids, and our kids are all, mine and one of them's kids are about the same age. The friend I was talking to, who said this, his kids are a bit older, but he had a very funny thing. He said he's always wondered if comedy is nature or nurture. And that's that big debate, you know, are you born funny? Do you become funny? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And he said, I always wondered if it was nature or nurture. And if you want to know the answer, all you need to do is look at comedians' kids, and then you will have your answer immediately. It's clearly nature. They're all fucking mad. And yeah, there's so many children. Like my children are, you know, one's diagnosed by the consultant with ADHD, not by the SEN teacher at school, which is a problem.
Whoa! That's a whole nother kettle of fish. You're really going into another world there. I saw on Twitter the other day from a teacher, leaked their head of SEN, and by accident left an email trail on the email they'd sent out to the school, which effectively explains that they must hold the line of the LEA that we will not allow any new diagnoses of anything through. We will not, no appeals allowed, nothing. No. And it's just like, what the hell's going on here? That our head of SEN has no compassion whatsoever for people that are struggling. But anyway, let's not go into that.
That's a whole ongoing problem with our school. And like, basically, now that, because we had to go and pay for private diagnosis. So we have struggled.
And then they don't want to accept that.
And again, the idea that an EHCP, apparently, this is another thing that doesn't help with the image, is that middle-class parents who think that an EHCP is a golden ticket for their children. I don't. I think my child might need some extra help. That's what I want. But as a result of this, and it's all down to the fact that all our public services are so woefully fucked that you can't. Basically, we couldn't get. Our daughter was not on the SEN register at school until we went to them with a consultant psychiatric diagnosis, going
with a certificate to actually show it.
But then, of course, what people will go, well, you paid £3,000 for that. Of course, you're going to want a certificate.
Because you wanted. Because that's your idea of fun, to go and pay £3,000 for something.
Exactly.
Though you're a great comedian, it's not really.
We can't get ADHD treatment for our daughter because the school have now put her on the SEN register because they've had to kind of go, okay, fair enough. But she's not. We have to go back and redo the ADHD thing again which is going to cost us more money, because they won't. They basically. Literally, the occupational therapist, the parents, the other families, the doctor, the fucking consultant have all gone ADHD. Yeah. But the SEN teacher at school, who is not, frankly, there nearly as much as her actual class teacher, has gone, she seems fine in the playground. I've asked her if she's got friends, and she said yes, so it's fine. And you kind of go, right, so you would...
But this is it. So girls are really, really like the female experience of ADHD is so, it's such a unconscious bias, even from women, even female doctors. You know,
Yep.
If you're an adult with as a child, you're not going to be probably as disrupted, probably because of social conditioning. Who knows? It could be biology. I don't know, and I'm not going there in this conversation. I'm not being cancelled over that anyway. But my point is that I've known. Speaking to a friend recently, and I've got a colleague that works particularly just with women in Hertfordshire, trying to help them get diagnosed and this sort of thing. And, you know, they are told they have postnatal depression. They're told they have hormonal issues. It's just depression often. It's bipolar, quite common diagnosis for women before they'll even get to that stage. And one of the things I've heard from one of my good friends and from this lady who runs, Pippa Simu, that campaigns for women to be listened to medically about ADHD. But my friend told me exactly the same quote. You can't have ADHD because you've got a job. I mean, literally, that's what... I don't understand how doctors can be saying that. I wanted to ask one thing. I was having watched your comedy, there's a lot, like you said, truth within it. There's two things. With impulsivity as an ADHD trait, like when you had that heckler scene at Edinburgh Fringe, where you looked absolutely shattered at the start of it, like I think you'd done about 3 gigs beforehand and you were really getting towards needing... Yeah.
It was that was about 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning,
Yeah. But also the fact that I can imagine it's not as simple as as everyone tries to style it. You would have had perfectionism over your set routine, what jokes come when, to get the right sort of crescendos and then punchlines to work. And there he is, he's ruined it. And you say several times, right, okay, there's no point even trying the set. Let's just stay on this then, if that's what we're going to do, you know. And I just think that impulsivity thing that we have, there are two things where I can see it almost going wrong. One is, say, with a heckler, when I guess with a heckler you have license to say whatever you like, but do you sometimes go a bit further than you meant to on not even with a heckler but in your comedy and go, yeah, I can't believe I actually said that on the stage. I think that was a little bit too far.
There's a certain element of, I mean, this is more of a discussion about comedy than it is about impulsivity.
Yeah,
almost like the job of the comedian is to find the line. And just step right up to it. And I'm sorry, but if you're going to find the line by stepping up to it, inevitably sometimes you're going to step over it. But the greatest, the greatest kind of thing to stop that is the audience response. That you work out how a joke. If it's not funny, I mean, I've got a joke that I really like that it took me a while to get right, which is basically about my kids' nativity play, where the headmaster beforehand says, if you want to take photos, that's fine, but please don't post anything on social media. And I put my hand up and said, what about the dark web? Now, I think that's a funny idea in that I am obviously pushing, so going, I mean, everyone knows the dark web's where paedophiles go and horrible things happen about it. So if you take that literally, and when I got it wrong at first, you could see people a bit horrified by it. But I think the idea that you stand in front, and this is another thing about truth in comedy, I didn't actually say that. However, my friend whose daughter is in my daughter's class, when we went to the nativity play this year, when he said don't do social media, just looked at me and went, ah.
So I wanted to play this quick game that I have for the podcast where it's like a Wheel of Fortune. I'm just going to share the screen. So if I was to spin it, so it's like the idea, I tried to get a jingle for it, but I thought about Barry Black because of... So I think you get the idea. Yeah. But if there are any of these traits that you think you immediately kind of relate to or have a thing, oh my God, that has happened to me, or you want to talk about let me know if there's something that a funny story, or actually something quite honestly that you find really isn't.
Yeah, I can think of quite a few from what I'm looking at. So just spin it. Oh, great in the crisis. No, that's gone. Right.
So lightning rod is the concept. That's the concept that even the psychiatrists say this, that if it's going to happen to anyone, it will happen to you. So like, say there are 20 people smoking dope at school, one person gets caught, it will be the person with ADHD. Yeah, I don't know if they're things that you feel.
I don't know if I am a lightning rod. I mean, I think but that's another one of those things like we were talking about being, isn't it? That everyone says that. Like I had, what did I have last week? I had, I wrote my car off a couple of weeks ago, which was very, very irritating. And then literally the next day, I lost 2 gigs that were very, well, I lost a very high paying gig because someone hadn't signed a contract and it got moved and blah, blah, blah. And but that is a bit like, and you're kind of going, you know what? This year was meant to be, I'm just doing it. And but then that's Murphy's Law, isn't it? Sod's Law, whatever you want to call it.
I think so.
The other side of that is that then, last night I just suddenly accidentally picked up an extra X pounds this weekend because someone needed me for something. My job kind of involves being able to take rejection really well. As a lightning rod for always getting caught, I don't know. I mean, I think
or disasters, or if it's going to happen to someone, I think you just hit the nail on the head. It's the fact that your job puts you in that at-risk situation of things happening, good and bad. I think I asked this to the previous podcast with Richard Bacon, and his wife totally debunked the whole theory by saying, I think it's actually because she doesn't have ADHD, I think it's because you tend to put yourselves in situations where
I think that's
something could go wrong, actually. And I was that's a really good point. Really good point there. Yeah. Let's try one more then, see if we can get another one. Here we go.
Spin it. It's not the quickest spin, is it? Hyperfocus. Hyperfocus, yeah, definitely. Hyperfocus I don't know. I think I was going to do this year. I was going to do what I did last year, which was write a show for the Edinburgh Festival and tour it in the autumn and start again next year. And then I just suddenly went, do you know what? I need a break. I've done 3 years running at the Edinburgh Festival. It's all gone really, really well. I literally said to my wife, I think, and also because I didn't really have any. This time last year, I'd already written most of the new show. This time, I don't have anything particularly that I'm focusing on and writing about. And a bit of me just went, take some pressure off yourself. And I said to my wife, maybe I won't do Edinburgh. And the look on her face made me go, that was the right decision, because it's really hard for her. And
it must be.
But the other thing was I wanted to do, I've got loads of things that are bothering me about the house that I haven't done, that, that needs mending and that needs doing. And there's loads of kind of sizable jobs. And I have done quite a lot of them and I've really enjoyed it. But I do have, if I'm doing DIY, I spent 20 minutes yesterday. I was trying to put a plant holder into the ceiling and it's plasterboard. So I spent 20 minutes working out a way of attaching it before actually going, because I'd originally gone, if I can find the beam, I can just put the hook straight into that. But if I can't, it's going to have to be through plasterboard. And I spent 25 minutes working out how to put it into plasterboard before going, why don't you just try and put it in the beam? And I've now put it in the beam, which actually took about 10 seconds.
I thought you were going to be even better, which was you were going to find the way to do it in plasterboard and then find, as you screwed in, you hit the beam straight away.
That would probably have happened. Yeah. But so there is hyperfocus. And I don't know if you found this at school. I mean, I was terrible at deadlines, but then when I actually started writing something, it was invariably about twice as long as it needed to be because I just was on it. And I do find, that I definitely, hyperfocus is definitely something I have. I do find that Elle Vance has helped, not necessarily with the organisation, but definitely with the kind of application. So, for instance, I came back from the Edinburgh Festival last end of August and was like, right, I want to tour this show. instead of using a producer, I literally sat down basically by myself with a laptop and did it. And that tour would not have happened if I hadn't been on the medication. Having said that, the itinerary might have been slightly more geographically better organised, but it was still something. Yeah.
That's one thing that makes me think about with comedy, that I've learned more and more about how important it is to have quite careful self-care with ADHD, because if you're not aware of it, you can go off in a hyper focus on creativity, be up really late at night, you don't get enough sleep, then you're more snappy with people, then you're more, emotionally fragile or fragmented. And, if you don't eat properly, if you don't do some exercise, these sorts of things can really actually start to have you fall apart and just go into a cycle of overwhelm and continue. But as a comedian, you have to do late nights. I was looking at Bill Bailey. I was trying to see if I could get to one of his shows, and there was he was doing Glasgow, then coming down via Middlesbrough or something, down to Bournemouth, then London, then Brighton, and then back to Glasgow in about 3 weeks. And I was just like, my God. So you're not, you again, it's a slightly sadomasochistic and slightly, it's that paradox again, isn't it? You're putting yourself in a lot more difficult situation,
The thing that my wife said that I found this hilarious, but I also think it's true, is that we have, because of how our brains are wired, we have a lack of the sort of dopamines and endorphins that normal people get, and adrenaline. And she said to me,
exactly.
Well, but we're all drug addicts. That's the thing, because basically we are. And my wife said this. She goes, in any other business, if I was been doing it this long at the level I've been doing it, I would be a company director or whatever. As it is, I'm on the comedy circuit, and sometimes I'm at the top of the bill, sometimes blah blah. And she went, you've been traveling all over the world for 20 years, nearly 25 years. You're treated like shit. You don't get the credit you deserve for your talent. You don't get paid enough. Your relationships suffer. Your health suffers, and you'll travel to the ends of the fucking earth to go and talk to 25 people just to get your fucking adrenaline hit. And I was a bit like, that is probably true. Yeah. And I think that's a really funny thing about comedian.
I do. I wrote it in my notes. I think that's one of the key things that draws it in. And even today, I left preparing for this with you. I mean, partly because I kind of, us having met before and stuff, but I carried on leaving it and left it right. So, and then at the last minute, decided I quickly needed to rush to the shop at 20 minutes before we were meant to start. I mean, I think I almost did that to get my adrenaline running more. I really don't know why I would do that. But is there anything else on the wheel that you might want me to spin for? Or we can leave it if you want, because there's only one question I wanted to ask you.
I do like chaos, because the thing about chaos, which is a good and a bad thing, which I always think in terms of creativity. Like whenever I think, there's nothing to write about, and then I'll go and watch another comedian and go, you can write about anything. But it kind of stops me. The idea that basically infinity stops me. I kind of go, it's almost overwhelming. Like if I start writing a book, for instance, I'd love to be able to be one of those people who sits down and writes a novel. I've never thought of a decent sort of plot that I want to work. One day I'd love to, but to me, it's almost like there is so much possibility. Just from the first word, there is so much possibility that I can sort of see that I go, that is quite scary. And I think there's a great thing in Douglas Adams in one of the Hitchhiker's books about the total perspective vortex, where you what it does is it plugs into a piece of fairy cake and extrapolates all matter in the universe from that piece of fairy cake. And so when you put yourself in the total perspective vortex, you see the size of yourself in relation to the entirety of creation, and that it's so overwhelming it blows your mind. And that idea of chaos, that I find it fascinating and intimidating, and that's what I think of when I think of as chaos. So it's if
I'm right, you're saying that actually you find it almost intimidating that it could be such such a long, being able to write on anything actually
Well, there are so many possibilities.
Kind of kills your inspiration. Yeah. I find the same with music. When I started writing music with just a sampler, and I could only use whatever I'd sampled. So I was very stuck to a key. And nowadays, I know more about it. Technology's better. I can have any instruments I want. And actually, I find that it's the constraints that give me the inspiration. I think the challenge is part of.
I think that's interesting.
I think
there's a great quote. It's in an Olivier biography I read, but it comes from someone else's. In order to do something, you must begin it, and that's the thing. And it's almost the intimidation of beginning. And if you can get over that, and that's when I've written things like I wrote a sitcom, they got commissioned. I think commissioned, it got optioned a couple of times. When I actually put my mind to it, things get done. But it's actually a procrastination.
But I bet you're actually, because this is a very ADHD thing. I don't know if you've discovered it yet, but it's very much. I've had clients, and each time I give them a questionnaire beforehand, I think only one out of all the clients I've worked with there's a question, what are you most proud of? And it's left blank by nearly every single person. And these are people who are experts in their field, people who run successful companies themselves and have run it the whole of their life, fought the system to do what they do. And they're one of the best at it in the world. And they have great families, and they're doing pretty well considering the ADHD that has affected them. And they're saying they got nothing to be proud of. I mean, it really needs some sort of re-scripting in their minds. But the last question I wanted to ask you, and we've been chatting for ages, and I'm really grateful for you being on. It's been really, really enjoyable having the conversation with you. It's a good excuse to catch up as well.
Absolutely.
If you were given the chance to go back in time and have the option of not having ADHD in your life, would you take that, just out of interest?
No, not for a moment.
I don't think I would either.
I don't think, because basically, it's almost that thing that I kind of go, it's not a big deal. It's part of me, and so I mean, it always reminds me of the question I always get, which is, I don't know about you, but I went away to boarding school when I was 10. And the big question is always,
the winding corridors and upright gentlemen. Yes, upright gentlemen. Beautiful, yeah.
Again, as to go full circle, do you regret it? No, because it's who I am. Did it affect me getting sent away at the age of 10? Hugely. But the fact, would I send my children to boarding school at the age of 10? Absolutely not. I think it's insane. But I can't regret it because it informed who I am. And again, this is what I mean about chaos. I have got some of my best friends to this day, and I'm sure till my dying day, were people I met when I was 10, 11 years old. And I wouldn't have those friends if I hadn't gone to that school. And they're,
if you hadn't been put in a prisoner of war context.
Exactly.
If you hadn't been sent.
It's chaos theory, isn't it? Or not chaos theory, rather the sort of sliding doors. What if?
Yeah.
And so, I would. There is a group of people who grew up at a school in Glasgow who I could have been dropped into, and my life would be different. I didn't. I went to a school in Bath, and so I can't regret it. In some, would I? Possibly a better way of couching the question might be, and I'm not criticising your way of putting it, but might be, would I prefer that my children didn't have ADHD? And that I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't know the answers to that. I hadn't even thought about that next step. The question was, I think for me, I think to myself that really most of the things that are most of the difficulties that I do experience in my life do come from that part of my brain and character. But most of the things that I really am proud of, most of the things that people respect me for in whether it's work I do, the style of things I do, and my approach to life that I'm proud of, comes from that same part of my brain as well. So I think it's almost like if someone say, Chris, he's very normal. I don't think I would appreciate that. I don't think, not that I try and be zany or anything, but normal sounds quite offensive to me. I just don't really get it.
Yeah.
So I think that is the last stage within that journey that I kind of mentioned earlier. That
I think there's a thing with
is to actually feel a pride in it. which I do.
Well, there's a thing about
Yeah.
in comedy as well, the idea that, I mean, I've had this for a long time, that I've always been seen as a safe pair of hands, which is basically means you can put me anywhere and I'll do a very good job for you. And there's a bit of me that goes, I don't want to be a safe pair of hands. I want to be the crazy motherfucker. You don't know what's going to happen, but when it happens, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And actually, but then there's a bit of me then, there's a terrified bit going, it's much better if I go out and just do a very good job here. And so you see someone like, I mean, someone like Johnny Vegas is a great idea. When he flies, it's just some of the best things you've ever seen. But when he doesn't fly, it's fucking awful. My ego can't cope with being fucking awful. But do you want to be normal? Well, what I do is not normal. So, but it is to me, and that's probably what's important.
Yeah. There was a thing on your last line of your website on the about that was along the lines, I think, of that sort of thing. Not a safe pair of hands, but something that seemed incongruous with the comedian's description that I noticed. I was just trying to look it up. I won't bore you with it now. But I wanted to say it's been a real pleasure chatting to you. And
Thank you for
I will
having
like
me.
to keep it. And by the way, you're playing in Birmingham in the end of March, I think. So I might well try and come and see you there if you're still doing it.
All right, well, give me a shout. I will see you then.
I will do. Be great.
All right,
and
friend.
thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm really glad that, it has come a long way from when we first chatted. I think you were slightly in the area of do I really want to get this diagnosis? Do you know what I mean? And I think
it was a brave, new world, but I didn't realise it was a brave old world.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, lots of love and always a pleasure. Take care. Thank you. Bye.
cool. All right, my friend.